Welcome back to the Finding Flow State podcast. We have got another interesting episode for you today where we're going to be talking about identity and attribution of things like content, which is particularly problematic in today's world with the increased use of AI. So, Lane, can you give us some background on where blockchain fits into this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So Noah mentioned this in a previous episode, but there is sort of a misnomer about how anonymous you are in the world of blockchain. So the sort of fundamental thing about the properties of public blockchain systems that give us identity are it's attribution. So the fact that we create an account that we know we hold the keys to and we can point to it as ours also means that when that history of account exists and we can use it to point to refer someone to if they are looking at whether or not they want to trade with us, or if they have an NFT that they want to trade with us, if they want to know how long our account's been active. That's all information that they can gather from just our address. And so your identity in the world of blockchain basically comes down to your public address, which other people can see, and they can see all the activity associated with it. Whether or not your address gets paired with an identity the way that we would think of identity as, I am Lane and you are Rob and Noah is Noah. And that's tied to our face and our preferences and what we look like and what we sound like. That doesn't happen by default in the world of blockchain, but it does happen both the more that you interact with different experiences. If you join something like this and say, this is my public address, then people can start to create that mapping. Or if you go through a product that requires KYC information, know your customer information, they also will potentially have a mapping of your identity to your public address. And so it's important to understand that you have sort of pseudonymity as long as you're using just a public address, and that can be used to refer people back to the reputation of your account. But if you attach your identity through some other process like KYC or engaging in public or posting your address online with another form of your identity like an Instagram account, then those things do become tied together and your otherwise pseudonymous blockchain address becomes very much a part of your sort of public online identity. And so the notion of having your own account definitely is important because that is what gives people agency in using these systems. It's your account that holds your assets, what you put in the account, and it's only your keys that give you access to it. And so that core element of agency for people to own their assets and keep control of them really is like one of the very core fundamental whys of why you would want to use blockchain technology, because it enables autonomy and self-sufficiency. When you're able to have things that are yours over a period of time, you can start to gather resources and earn off of them or share them with other people who maybe pay you for sharing those resources with them. And all of those things eventually will lead to, of course, you building a reputation in the ecosystem, one that gives you access to maybe credit or points or anything with your social sphere, much like you would think of a credit score today. And ultimately that sort of continues to build into the ability to build generational wealth, where people have an account that's theirs and they have ownership of it. And they have ownership of it over a very long period of time, maintained by a system that will function in perpetuity for, tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of years. That'd be amazing if we still have blockchain running in thousands of years. Bold, yeah. I genuinely hope we've moved past it by then, but certainly public blockchains exist on the same time horizon as the biggest organizations that exist today that you would trust with ensuring that your own grandkids got access to something that you set aside for them today. And so it starts as just your address, but your address really is sort of the home to everything that gives you agency, autonomy, access to new experiences and maybe bigger business opportunities than you would have otherwise had. And all of those things ultimately give you the ability to build businesses and wealth that goes just beyond yourself. And so it really is a very exciting technology for people who are thinking differently about how they want to manage their resources in the world and who are maybe frustrated by the systems that are currently managing their resources. Two of the challenges we know that we face are inflation. We see that all the time, right? Governments make choices about what money is worth when they decide to print more or less or get into like a significant amount of debt with another country. That really changes the purchasing power of an individual's assets. And in the world of public blockchain, the rate of inflation typically, especially in the case of like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Flow, they're well known for having their inflation pre-coded by the people who sort of initially set out the parameters of the system. And it's a very complex and sometimes even impossible process to change that rate of inflation, which is a huge difference from what happens today in the world of sort of like just where we live, and people are put into power, they may be voted into power, and it's like entirely a political choice about whether or not more money would be printed or not. And it's not one that the public would necessarily be consulted on at all. And so you're in a situation where your purchasing power is being affected by people who aren't you, and they're eroding it at a rate that means your kids maybe never get anything out of it. And so there are very real challenges to your identity and agency and assets and autonomy be held on systems that aren't public blockchains because of sort of their ability to change the rules in a way that a public blockchain would not. Sometimes it's also just like the enforcement of rules that can make things really, really quite challenging. And I think, Rob, that's something that you've thought a little bit about when it comes to managing the things that you have and how you would potentially give them to your kids in the future. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you brought up so many good points there that there are like 9 things in my head that I want to talk about, and I don't think I have the capacity to hold all of them. So I'm going to talk about the ones I can remember quickly. So when it comes to things like inheritance and your will when you die and stuff like that, I don't know about every country, but the UK, it's a cumbersome process. It's difficult, it's long, it's expensive, it's inefficient in every single way. And I think it could really benefit from blockchain, where a lot of it could be automated. And this, I think one of the interesting things is not only could it be automated, but that the provenance of certain things is well documented and on chain. And I think provenance is an important part of blockchain in general. It's one of the areas that I've always found most interesting. In fact, I stumbled across an article that I wrote in 2019 about how we are going to see, and I'm still sticking by this, we are going to see the rise of digital antiques in the next sort of 50 to 100 years, where the earliest NFTs, like CryptoPunks, will become digital. They kind of already are, but they'll become digital antiques, like the earliest verifiable. So when we talk about provenance, perhaps I should unpack that a little bit. When we talk about provenance, we can see a timeline of, so say you had an NFT. I've got lots of NFTs in my wallet, and I can see when I bought them, like to the second, how long I've held them, obviously, who held it before me, which wallets held it before me, when was it minted, created. And you can see this full timeline from inception to the point of receipt to you. And I think that's incredible as well. If you get something passed down by your granddad, you often have to go on thing like Reddit to try and get someone to age it. Like I'm a big watch guy, and I think I've mentioned that before. And finding out the age of watches can be difficult. You have to get the serial number. You have to go through. Sometimes you have to go to the libraries that they have for the different models, and so that it's a real solution for that with provenance being trackable. What were the other points you brought up? Accountability. So one of my favorite points with this is reputation, and it's not quite as serious a point as you were making, Lane, but reputation online could be incredibly valuable in stopping things like toxicity and bullying. Because if you had something on the line, like the people that are bullying online are unlikely to go into a supermarket and start berating someone for being fat, but they'll do it online behind a pseudonym, knowing that no one will ever, I mean, it might as well be anonymity because no one will ever find out who they are. But they're not going to do it in person because, well, there's not only social norms that they're trying to adhere to, but people can see them. They might know their name. They might know where they live. They might know their job. There's too many consequences. There's too much on the line. And I think that reputation can be solved in a way by having your online persona sort of tied to something. And it doesn't have to be your real identity, which we're going to come back to that, but it doesn't have to be your real identity. Imagine, for example, a computer game. If you've played 10,000 hours of a computer game on one account and you've got all these achievements and statistics and stuff, you're going to be attached to that, and you're not going to want to risk it by, being obscene to someone and having it banned or taken away from you or whatever, which comes back to ownership, by the way. You're going to be more careful with that because you have a sort of reputation. I think if we can expand that to other areas of the digital arena, then that's a big win. One more point you brought up was you're talking about credit for, I can't remember in what context you brought it up.
As reputation, basically, like your reputation is what allows you to build a credit score. So I think it was very much to what you were just saying of like
Yes.
if people know that you're reputable because you're not just an account that showed up yesterday with like $2 or two whatever currency in the thing. You're someone, the account's been there for years, you use it all the time, there's like stuff in it that you care about. That really contributes to people being like, yeah, this is a legitimate account. There's people, this person has a vested interest, and therefore we vouch for the authenticity of whether or not they're going to continue to be a participating member of this ecosystem. So it was very much to your reputation point.
Yeah, this wasn't the original point I was going to make, but we're seeing that a lot at the moment anyway, with things like airdrops and meme coins to an extent, where they don't want bots. Like the biggest problem with airdrops, which I mean, to give a very, very broad definition, is simply having a token dropped into your wallet because you ticked certain boxes, you interacted with a certain community, or you might have even just signed up early or something. And one of the ways that people have been getting around bots is by having people's provenance tested. For example, there's I got sent an inordinate amount of a meme coin, a new meme coin, because I had a long provenance in the ecosystem it was created. And they looked at wallets that were created before a certain date, and then they looked at wallets that held a certain number of NFTs or a certain number of the ecosystem, like certain number of flow tokens, for example. And then they sent the meme coins out to only those accounts. And that meme coin actually did quite well because it was sent to the right people. So I think there's a lot of value to be had with your own provenance, as well as the provenance of items, like being able to prove that you've been somewhere for a long time and you're a contributing member of an ecosystem is valuable. And it's often reciprocated by, you know, like Flow, for example, Lane, you're going to value those people like Noah that are just in there working away all the time, and you're noticing it. They're the people you want around in your ecosystem. You don't want the people that drop in, you know, just mess around a little bit and then leave, or try and scam people. You can filter out a lot of those things by just having someone with a long enough provenance.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of even works a little bit like a passport. You know, when you travel around, and I apologize if this is like a very, if someone isn't not traveling across borders, this example is not going to make a lot of sense. But if you do, when you have a passport, they stamp it, right? And they say, this is the day that they got to this place. This is the day they got to this place. And each border that you interact with uses all the other stamps to be like, ah, yes, this is a person who, you know, they start to profile you. They start to get a sense of how many more follow-up questions they're going to have for you. But it is very, very helpful to know someone's footprint. Like where have they been? Who do they interact with? It's sort of like the same way you would do a background check on someone in the real world, where you'd find you'd find people that person knows and ask them about their character. In the world of blockchain, you'd look at their account, see who they transact with, and then maybe track an account down that you recognize and say, hey, this person sold something to you a couple years back. Like, what was that like? Or something to that effect. And so it does really help just build the storyline, I guess, of what that account does. And yeah, as humans, that it helps us a lot to sort of contextualize assets in the context of NFTs, people in the context of like the reputation of their account. Having the context of what that thing exists in really does change the value of it a lot, and your certainty of transacting with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we keep touching on also proof of authenticity, which I think is such a huge point. And when we talk about passing things down, you know, inheriting stuff, having that proof that something's authentic is. So when you described this episode, you used the term defensible property. What made me think
regrettably,
of that,
and I'm sorry about that.
No, I know I called it dry, which is mean.
No, you're right.
What it made me think of immediately is something that has been ongoing for years but hasn't quite come to fruition yet, which is land registry and the inefficiencies there, which is so it varies in how big a problem it is. It's kind of like wills and inheritance. On the lower end of problem efficiency, it's just kind of inefficient. Land registry is a centralized in the UK at least, it's a centralized office. You have to request documents a lot of the time. It's time consuming. You have to spend money, and it's just a bit of a nightmare. But then on the opposite, more extreme end, there are plenty of countries where land registry deeds are fraudulently tampered with, and people lose their land because it's being tampered with. And blockchain is being used to solve that in lots and lots of countries. In fact, if I remember rightly, Honduras started looking at it in 2015. I don't think it ever made it out of the pilot program. But before we started recording this, I looked up to see if there were any more recent examples of blockchain solving land registry issues. And it turns out there's, I've got it here. So there's a company called Ben, and they are working on using blockchain to solve land registry across the entire of Africa. And they had some crazy stats, right? So in Ghana, 80% of land titles were undocumented. And so what Ben proposed is, by moving this whole thing on chain, it not only is it publicly accessible, it's efficient, it's verifiable by anyone. You've got provenance of the land. You've got all these benefits, but one of the core selling points for them is that it will attract people to invest in land, which is currently completely untenable as an investment if 80% of the land is undocumented. So I just thought that's a really, really cool example of defensible property, and I thought I'd wedge it in there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did, because the land example really is a very concrete example of why you would want defensible property. And the defensible part of it, like in the world of blockchain, the digital thing is defensible because it lives in your account and only you get to sign for changes to your account. In the physical world, definitely helps to have a record of. The question becomes like, which record do they enforce, basically? Like, you do have to, even if there is a thing on chain that has the coordinates of all the plots of land and it assigns them to a bunch of people, if that isn't the document or the source of truth that the local authorities are using to decide who gets to occupy the land, then it kind of unfortunately still doesn't matter. But I think where blockchain really does help improve upon it is like you do start to get a lot closer to one consistent land registry that people can, that they can access from anywhere. They know that it's up to date. And when you know that you are working off of sort of the latest, most up-to-date copy, it does start to get preferred, because often what happens in some places is like land title just gets tied up in an office on a piece of paper somewhere, and then it doesn't get faxed to who it needs to. And like they're just very, like stuff just happens. But if you have a tool that makes it a little bit easier for people to know that they are accessing the most consistent, most up-to-date version of history, and they're accessing a version of history where they can see that when the transfer titled, there was also a transfer of funds to the original owner.
Yeah.
That's the kind of that you want to know, that if you're getting that plot of land assigned to you, the person who's giving it to you does truly own it, because you can see where they paid someone else for it in the past. And so, yeah, definitely there's like so much room for improvement there, but it does still unfortunately present sort of the last mile problem that we see with blockchain all the time, where you have to still ensure it's like the record that people are using, because it doesn't matter if we put the whole thing on chain if the local authorities are still using their own paper clipboard copy from 60 years ago, and they would still very much be at liberty to do that. And so we do have to make sure the incentives are there for people to feel like they're getting the most out of using the up-to-date system. I would be very curious to know how Ben is solving that, the adoption problem, I guess, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. They've been working on it for, I think it was 8 years. So, okay, that is all we have time for this week. So for more of this conversation, make sure you tune in next week.